I never imagined I'd be someone's wife. That might sound strange to hear in a love story, but it's the truth. I didn't grow up daydreaming about weddings, about walking down aisles, or being chosen. For as long as I can remember, I believed love was a thing that happened to other people, not people like me. I was the plus-sized girl in a world that rewards symmetry and slim silhouettes. From my earliest school days, I knew where I stood on the scale of visibility. Boys would ignore me even when I raised my hand first in class. Teachers paired me with the quiet kids or left me out of performances where aesthetics mattered. And in those awkward teenage years when crushes were passed like folded notes, I was the friend who carried the notes, not the girl they were for. Even at home, the message was clear. My mum, bless her, is a stunning woman. Slim, radiant, glowing skin, a smile that drew compliments from strangers. My dad adored her. I remember him calling her sweet mama looking 16, well into her 40s. He used to say it like a joke, but I saw the pride in his eyes every time he said it. I also saw the way he never looked at me the same. Not that he didn't love me. He just didn't see me the way he saw her. And I noticed. My home was beautiful from the outside, but complicated inside. My dad wasn't physically abusive, but he was cruel in ways people clapped for. He'd pinch my stomach at breakfast and say, "You don't need extra toast." If I got a new dress, he'd ask how much cloth they had to use for it. When I cried, my mother would brush my hair and say, "He doesn't mean it like that," then gently suggest, "I cut carbs." Her love came with conditions. Be smaller, quieter, less of a burden. At 10, I learned to hide food. At 12, I started chewing gum to suppress hunger. At 14, I nearly fainted during morning assembly from trying a 3-day water cleanse I found online. At 15, I started journaling. Not dreams or feelings, just calorie counts. School wasn't safer. I remember PE class being a stage for shame. The teacher would call me out in front of everyone, asking if I needed a modified activity. Kids would giggle. One girl, Melissa, once whispered, "She might break the trampoline." I laughed, a rehearsed, detached chuckle that felt like betrayal to my younger self. There were darker moments too. A cousin, a few years older, once made a disgusting comment during a family barbecue. "Thick girls like you are better in the dark," he said when no one else was around. I froze, told no one. Internalized everything. By the time I was 16, I was fluent in self-loathing. I knew how to edit myself out of group chats, decline invites subtly, make jokes about my weight before anyone else could. I learned to stand at the edge of photos, turn slightly to look slimmer, and always hold something. A jacket, a purse, a friend's hand, to block parts of my body. My escape was fiction. Books were safer than people. Jane Eyre understood being invisible. Chimamanda wrote like she saw me. I consumed self-help books, hoping they'd teach me how to change. I even read wedding magazines I found in a neighbour's bin. Not because I believed I'd marry, but because I liked pretending someone could look at me that way. With awe. University offered a reset, new city, new people. But I brought my fears with me. I stayed quiet in lecture halls, joined no societies. When flatmates went out, I stayed in. If a guy showed interest, I assumed it was a prank. There was one boy, Rohan, who seemed genuine. He asked to walk me to class once. I said yes. That night I overheard his friend mocking him. What's next, dating a sofa? I never spoke to Rohan again. I graduated with first-class honours and no stories. In my mid-20s, I got a job as an admin assistant in a decent company. Quiet, predictable, safe. I celebrated birthdays with cupcakes no one remembered I brought. I was dependable, helpful, always smiling. No one ever asked how I was really doing. I never offered. Dating apps were worse. One guy messaged, "Never been with a big girl, you keen?" Another promised he'd take me to a buffet on our first date. One man, older, married, offered to spoil me on the side. I deleted the app. Deleted the idea of love. Instead, I curated my own gentle life. Friday nights, candles and crime dramas. Saturdays, long walks, thrift books, solo brunches. I had a shelf of untouched skincare products and playlists titled If I Were Loved. I convinced myself I was content, not happy, but safe. Until James. James came into my life the way a new song enters a quiet room, unassuming, then suddenly everywhere. It was Zara's birthday dinner, a loud, laughter-filled table at a cosy Italian place in Soho. I had almost cancelled. My dress didn't fit right, and I'd convinced myself the chair would wobble under my weight. But Zara begged. "Don't be silly, it's my birthday," she said. "You're coming." So I went. I wore black, cinched my waist, let my hair down. I sat 2 seats away from the loudest man at the table, James. Tall, deep-voiced, bearded, and effortlessly confident. He had that kind of presence that made people lean in when he spoke. I kept my eyes on my lasagna. But he noticed me. That's the thing that still catches in my throat sometimes. He noticed. He passed me the wine without being asked. Asked me what books I read. Not do you read, but what do you read? And when I told him I liked Toni Morrison, he quoted a line from Beloved. I stared at him. "You've read that?" He smiled. "Twice. It broke me." I don't remember the rest of the dinner. Just that he walked me to the station afterward and said, "I hope this isn't weird, but I'd like to see you again." I blinked. "Me?" He chuckled. "Yeah, you." That was the beginning. Our first date was at a bookstore cafe. He showed up with a copy of Half of a Yellow Sun, said he wanted my thoughts on the ending. I brought him a slice of banana bread. We talked for hours. About everything. Childhood, scars, favourite desserts, dreams we never said out loud. It felt like I was living someone else's life. When he touched my hand that night, I flinched. Not because I was scared, but because I didn't think I deserved that warmth. The next few weeks felt unreal. He messaged every morning, called every night, sent me pictures of clouds that looked like animals, brought me daisies because I once said I liked ugly flowers. When he kissed me for the first time, I cried. Not loudly, just a soft tear. He pulled back. Did I do something wrong? No, I whispered. I just don't get picked. He held my face gently. Well, I'm picking you. I wish I could say I believed him fully that night. I didn't. But I wanted to. I introduced him to my friends. They were polite but surprised. Zara even said, "He's really into you, huh?" It wasn't cruel, but it stung, like she was trying to make sense of it too. When he met my parents, my mum smiled a little too hard. My dad gave his usual nod but later pulled me aside. "Just be careful," he said. "Men like that don't always stick around." The doubts crept in again. Still, James kept showing up, cooked me pasta on stormy nights, massaged my calves when I cried from period cramps, took unflattering selfies with me and posted them. He made me feel seen, like really, wholly, painfully seen. But love doesn't erase fear. One night, after we'd watched a documentary about unconventional couples, I stumbled on a Reddit thread about attractive men dating plus-sized women. The comments were vile, calling us settling options, fetishes, or easy targets. Something in me cracked open. I shut down for 3 days, didn't reply to James, didn't eat. I stared at myself in the mirror and asked, what if he wakes up one day and sees what they see? He showed up at my flat on the 4th day with a carton of soup and his favourite hoodie. "Whatever it is," he said, "talk to me." I told him everything. About the comments, the thread, my fears, my belief that he'd eventually leave. He didn't try to fix it, he just listened. Then he said something I won't forget. "You're not broken. The world is." And he stayed. A year later he proposed, not with a flash mob, just us, on my sofa, in pyjamas, sharing a bowl of rice. He pulled out a ring and asked, "Will you let me love you for the rest of our lives?" I cried again, not out of disbelief, but because for the first time I believed someone saw me and chose me anyway. The night after James proposed, I couldn't sleep. He had gone home, and I sat alone on my sofa with the ring still on my finger. It was beautiful, simple, with a gold band and a single stone. But it felt heavier than it looked. It wasn't just a ring. It was a declaration. A promise. A question I didn't know how to answer. Do I deserve this? The morning after, my phone was flooded with messages. Zara screamed in all caps. My mum called immediately. She was crying. "My baby girl is getting married," she said. "You're the first bride in the family." It hit me then that she'd never expected it either. The engagement moved fast. James was excited. He started researching venues and colour palettes. I watched him build a Pinterest board full of eucalyptus leaves and rustic chairs, and all I could think was, when will the fairy tale fall apart? We agreed to a 1-year engagement. That was the plan. But what no one told me is that engagement isn't just joyful. It's confronting. I had to look at myself in the mirror every day and reckon with the truth that I was going to be someone's wife. Not in theory, not in a fantasy, but for real. We started premarital counselling. One of the questions on the form asked, "What do you fear most about marriage?" I wrote, "Losing myself." I didn't even realize I felt that until I saw the words written down. James saw it too. He looked at me in silence. Then he said, "Let's promise not to let that happen. We build something that lets us grow, not shrink." And I believed him, until we started planning the wedding. Weddings bring out opinions, strong ones. My mother had a vision. Mermaid dress, hair up, lose at least a stone before the big day. You want to look good for the photos? I smiled and nodded, but inside I wilted. One day she sent me a link to a slimming tea. I didn't reply. She followed up. "Just thinking of your big day." James caught me crying in the bathroom a week later. I hadn't told him about the tea, but he knew. He saw the way my joy was shrinking. "You don't have to change for anyone," he said, "especially not them." But that's the thing about old wounds. Even when they've scarred over, pressure finds them. I started skipping meals again, told myself it was stress, spent hours watching weight loss videos on YouTube. I ordered a wedding dress 2 sizes too small as motivation. The worst part? I didn't tell James. Instead, I snapped at him. Over small things. Why he was late, why he didn't call, why he didn't notice I was hurting. He noticed. Of course he did. We had our first real fight 2 months into the planning. I accused him of not understanding what it meant to live in my body. He accused me of pushing him away. I shouted. He went quiet. Then he said something that felt like a punch. "Sometimes I think you're waiting for me to leave just so you can say I told you so." I froze, because he was right. I had spent so long building exits in my mind that I didn't know how to stay. Every time he loved me louder, I flinched. Every compliment felt like a setup. Every smile a countdown. I started therapy. Not for the wedding. For me. I found a Black woman therapist online. She specialized in body image, trauma, and self-worth. Her name was Claudia. The first thing she said to me was, "When did you first learn that you weren't enough?" I cried through the entire first session. Week after week, we unpacked the narratives I carried, my father's comments, the jokes, the boys in school, the magazines, the silence. We talked about how I had taught myself that love was earned, not given, that if I wasn't perfect, I was disposable. But James kept showing up. He came to therapy with me once, sat beside me while I told Claudia, "I'm scared he'll leave when he sees the real me." He held my hand and said, "This is the real you, and I'm still here." That night we lay in bed, and I told him about the slimming tea, the dress, the skipped meals. He didn't get angry. He just said, "No dress is worth shrinking for." We decided to pause the wedding planning. It shocked our families. My mum called in a panic. "Are you still getting married?" I told her yes, just not at the cost of my healing. James and I went away for a weekend, a quiet cabin, no signal, just books and board games. We talked about our future, the messy, unfiltered version. Kids or not. Where we'd live. What scared us. What excited us. I told him I wanted to write one day. He told me he wanted to build furniture. It felt like marriage without the pressure. Just us, choosing each other again. When we got back, I bought a new dress. One that fit me now. I threw the old one away. And slowly, I started choosing myself too. The cabin weekend changed something in us. Not in the dramatic way movies portray, but in small, necessary ways. We returned with quieter minds and softer edges. For once, I didn't feel like I had to earn the air I breathed around James. He simply let me be. Bloated stomach from too much wine, frizzy hair from the rain, stories that took too long to tell. We slipped into a different kind of intimacy, not just physical, though that too, but the kind where silence didn't feel like tension. We could just exist. And that, more than anything, convinced me we might actually make it. Claudia, my therapist, noticed the shift. "You're starting to believe that love isn't a trap," she said during one session. "That's big. But healing isn't linear. And the world doesn't always allow peace to linger. The closer the new wedding date came, the louder everyone else became. What colours are you doing? Are you doing a fat-friendly bridal shoot? Will James carry you over the threshold? That one came from my uncle. He laughed after he said it. I didn't. James offered to cut down the guest list. We don't owe anyone a front row seat to our love story. But part of me still wanted the affirmation, the photo proof that I was chosen, that this moment happened, that I belonged. I said yes to a dress I liked but didn't love. Again. I let the seamstress nip it in tighter than necessary. Again. I said nothing when a boutique clerk asked if I wanted a cape to draw the eye upward. Again. But something different happened this time. I stopped internalizing it. James had started sticking post-it notes on the mirror, not every day, not in a forced way, but whenever he felt like it. You were born worthy. Your laugh is my favourite music. I'm not settling, I'm ascending. One day I found one that simply read, "You are the whole story." I kept that one in my purse. Around this time, I joined a private support group online. Women who identified as fat and in long-term relationships or marriages. We didn't all have the same backgrounds or body types or even experiences, but we shared something deeper, a search for belonging inside love. One post stuck with me. A woman named Ruth wrote, "You are not hard to love. You're just not used to being loved well." I cried reading it, printed it out, showed it to Claudia. James and I had a joint session 2 weeks before the wedding. Claudia asked him what his biggest fear was. He looked at me and said, "That she'll keep doubting what I see in her, and I won't know how to stop the bleeding." I wept. Not because of the words, but because of how gently he said them. Like he wasn't angry at the wound, just tired of watching me bleed. The wedding was not perfect. It rained. The DJ mixed up our first dance song. My dress pinched under my arms. And still, it was the best day of my life. James looked at me like I was everything. Not despite my body. Not because of my confidence. Just me. And I believed him. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for the joke to land or the pity to leak through. I wasn't scanning faces for disbelief. I just let the moment hold me. We danced badly, we laughed loudly. My mum cried during her toast, but she also said, "I see her now, fully, and I'm proud." That meant more than I expected. At the hotel later that night, James took off my dress like it was a fragile thing. Not because it cost money, but because he respected what it had carried. Every inch of history, every soft curve, every scar and fear. We didn't make love right away. We just lay there, hands clasped, talking about how far we'd come. He asked, "Do you still wonder why I picked you?" I smiled. "Sometimes." He kissed my forehead. "Then I'll keep reminding you." We fell asleep like that. And for the first time in my life, I didn't dream of becoming someone else. Marriage, I learned quickly, isn't just a ceremony or a shared lease. It's the merging of two histories, and mine was louder than I expected. The morning after our wedding, I woke up before James. Sunlight streamed through the hotel curtains. My ring glinted against the white sheet, and I felt something between disbelief and peace. Not the type I imagined from fairy tales, but something more grounded, like I had finally arrived somewhere I didn't think existed. James stirred beside me. His hand found mine under the covers. "Wife," he said groggily and smiled. "That still feels wild." It did. We spent the morning in bed, then strolled down for breakfast in robes and tangled hair. People stared, not rudely, just curious. He ordered me extra toast. I didn't flinch. That felt like a small miracle. When we got home 2 days later, the flat felt different. It wasn't bigger or cleaner. It just held us differently. James lit candles. I unpacked our gifts. We fell into a kind of soft silence that didn't ask to be filled. Then came the cards, the calls, the unsolicited advice. "Now you have to watch your weight more. Don't let him see you in your bonnet too often. Give him space or he'll feel trapped." I smiled through most of them, but each tip felt like a warning, like love was a sandcastle waiting for tide. Work resumed, and with it real life. Commuting, laundry, late meetings, empty fridge. James and I tried to keep the magic. Friday takeaways, slow dancing in the kitchen, spontaneous movie nights. But real life is persistent. We had our first argument as husband and wife 3 weeks in. I was stressed about work. He forgot to take the bins out. I snapped. He sighed. We went to bed back to back. The next morning he brought me tea. "Truce?" he asked. "Forever's too long to stay mad." I smiled. That was the difference. We fought, but we fought toward each other. Still, the pressure built quietly. People expected us to be the perfect couple. We got invited to couple dinners. Friends asked for relationship advice. Instagram DMs flooded with goals and "teach me your secrets." I started to feel like a performer in my own marriage, smiling wider at brunch, posting selfies even when we'd argued minutes before. The truth was simpler and less glamorous. Love takes work, especially when you're still learning how to love yourself. Claudia reminded me, you don't owe the world your relationship. One day, James came home later than usual. I had cooked. He forgot to text. My heart raced in that old familiar way, fear disguised as anger. When he walked through the door, I snapped again. "You could have said something. Do you think I enjoy waiting?" He stared at me, then gently placed his bag down. "Do you think I'm him?" I froze. He didn't mean anyone in particular, just all the ghosts I was still fighting. Every boy who had mocked, every comment my father made, every time I was made to feel unworthy. "I'm not leaving," James said, "even when you're scared, even when it's messy." I sat down, exhaled. "I don't always know how to believe that." He nodded. "Then we keep trying." Marriage, I'm learning, is not a destination. It's a decision, made daily. There are days I feel beautiful, and days I avoid mirrors. Days we laugh until we can't breathe, and days we eat dinner in silence. But the through line is this: he stays, and I stay. Not because it's easy, but because we promised to. To build, to heal, to grow, together. And on the hard days, I remind myself, love isn't a miracle, it's a practice. And I finally believe I'm worthy of the lesson. Marriage is a winding road, and no one warns you how quiet it can feel after the high. Once the congratulations fade, the cake is eaten, the photos posted and forgotten, what's left is the life you return to. And that life demands more than romance. The first quiet riff started with a pillow. It was late September, and James had begun snoring again. It wasn't loud, just enough to wake me up most nights. I'd nudge him, he'd turn, and I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if it was selfish to crave silence. One morning after a rough night, I moved to the couch. He found me there at 6 a.m., curled up in a blanket. "Are you okay?" "Just needed space," I mumbled. His eyes softened. "You could have woken me." I shrugged. "Didn't want to disturb you." But the truth was deeper. I didn't want to be the difficult wife, the nag, the one who makes mountains of molehills. So I swallowed discomfort, smiled through tiredness. This became a pattern. Small inconveniences, little resentments, quiet silences stretched longer each week. We still loved each other, still kissed goodbye, still had game nights and laughter. But something was shifting, not breaking, just bending. And then came the baby talk. James mentioned it casually one Saturday afternoon while we were sorting laundry. I was thinking, maybe next year we could start trying. My chest tightened. I hadn't even thought about children. I was just learning how to live without flinching at my reflection. But he said it with such hope, such certainty that I smiled and nodded. Maybe. That night I Googled, what if I don't want kids yet, but my husband does? Claudia asked me in our next session, what's the fear? I told her the truth. I'm scared I'll disappear again. Into motherhood. Into expectations. Into someone I don't recognize. She nodded. Then your answer isn't no. It's not yet. James took the news well, at least on the surface. He said he understood, but I saw the flicker of disappointment, heard it in how he stopped bringing it up, in how he shifted when friends announced pregnancies. And that guilt clung to me. Meanwhile, my career was blossoming. I was promoted. My team grew. I was asked to mentor junior staff. I loved the work. But with it came longer hours, more meetings, and less time for James. He never complained, but I caught him scrolling through Airbnb listings one night. Just dreaming, he said. I knew better. We booked a weekend away. Cornwall, windy cliffs and quiet beaches. It was meant to reconnect us, but it only magnified how far we'd drifted. Over dinner, he finally said it. I feel like you're building a life. That doesn't have room for me. The wine burned going down. That's not true. He looked tired, not angry, just weary. I know you love me, but sometimes I feel like a guest in your world. That hurt. Because I'd spent so long making myself smaller, I didn't realize I had grown. And maybe outgrown parts of our rhythm. That night we lay side by side, not touching. I whispered, I don't know how to be everything to everyone. He replied, I don't need everything. Just don't shut me out. We didn't fix it that weekend, but we named the ache, and naming it gave us a place to start again. We made changes. Date nights became sacred again. I blocked out Sundays. No work, no emails. We took long walks, fewer photos, more presents, and therapy. This time, together. In one session, Claudia asked, "What do you miss most about your early days together?" James said, "Her eyes when she read me poetry." I said, "The way he looked at me like I was a miracle." We both cried. Afterward, in the car, James took my hand. "Let's not lose that." And we didn't. Not every day is a fairy tale. There are still arguments, still silences. But now there's also intention. We've learned that forever isn't about never falling. It's about learning how to rise together. And as we walk this road side by side, I carry this truth. Love isn't just the high. It's how you echo through the lows. And we're still echoing, still choosing. Every day. A perfectly ordinary Wednesday. I had popped into James's office to drop off his forgotten wallet. He was in a meeting, but his assistant, a bright-eyed woman named Freya, invited me to wait. While I sat in the open office lounge, I saw her, slim, tailored suit, cascading waves of hair, laugh that carried. She stood beside James's desk, holding a folder, laughing at something he'd said before the door closed behind them. That laugh stayed with me. I told myself it meant nothing. James had always worked with women, but something about her stuck. Maybe it was how easily she rested her hand on his shoulder, how his eyes crinkled when he smiled at her, or how quickly my heart folded in on itself like a paper crane caught in the rain. That night, I brought it up. Not directly. Just a casual, "You and Freya seem close." He blinked. "She's great at her job." I smiled tightly. "She's also gorgeous." He raised an eyebrow. "What does that have to do with anything?" I waved it off. "Nothing. Just an observation." But it wasn't nothing. It became a lens. Every mention of the office, every late night, every group outing made my throat tighten. I started noticing the changes in myself. I spent longer in front of the mirror, compared our bodies, our voices, our laughter. I downloaded calorie tracking apps again. Skipped dinner once. Just once. But it scared me. I didn't tell James. Instead, I grew colder, less affectionate, more distant. I didn't mean to punish him, but I didn't know how to silence the voice that whispered, "What if he wakes up and realizes he could do better?" He noticed. Of course he did. One evening, he reached for my hand on the couch and I pulled away. Not out of anger, out of shame. "Talk to me," he said gently. I shook my head. "I'm tired." But he didn't stop. Later that night, he said, "You haven't looked at me the same in weeks." I finally cracked. I told him everything. About Freya, about my fears, about the gnawing insecurity that had taken residence in my chest. He didn't laugh. He didn't get defensive. He just said, "I see you. I chose you. I keep choosing you." And then, after a pause, he added, "But I can't fight a ghost you won't name." The next day, I started journaling again. Not calories, feelings. I wrote about that day in the office, about every girl who ever made me feel invisible, about the parts of me I still hide. In therapy, Claudia said, "Jealousy isn't always about others. It's about the parts of ourselves we still reject." That stung, because it was true. I realized Freya hadn't done anything wrong. She was lovely, smart, talented. But in my mind, she became a mirror, and I hated what I saw. So I did something new. I invited James to lunch at his office. I wore a dress that made me feel powerful. Not smaller, present. Freya greeted me warmly, complimented my earrings. She didn't feel like a threat anymore. Just a person, a woman with her own life, dreams, insecurities, just like me. That night, James hugged me tightly. You seemed lighter today. And I was. Not fixed, but freer. Because jealousy will knock. But I get to choose whether I open the door. After the storm, what's left is clarity, or at least the chance to seek it. Following the Freya incident, I made a decision. I was going to rebuild the relationship I had with myself, not just as a wife, but as a woman. I returned to the gym, not to shrink, but to move. I took salsa classes with Zara. I bought new lingerie, not for James, but because I liked how it made me feel. One Saturday morning, James caught me dancing to old-school Beyoncé in the kitchen. I had flour on my cheek, a ripped tee on, and no makeup. He stared. "What?" I laughed. He grinned. You're glowing." Something about that word settled deep. I started letting go. Of the comparisons, of the imagined competitors, of the fear that love had an expiration date tied to beauty. One evening, I stood in front of the mirror, really looking at myself. My belly wasn't flat, my arms were soft, my thighs touched, but I saw joy in my eyes. I whispered to my reflection, "You are enough." Not because someone picked me, not because I was married, but because I was still here, still standing, still loving. That night I wrote James a letter. It wasn't an apology. It was a vow. I promise to love me so I can love you better. I promise to trust what we've built even when the world tries to make me doubt it. And I promise to let the past stay where it belongs, behind us. He read it the next morning, didn't say a word, just kissed my forehead and held me. And that was enough. Healing isn't linear. Some days I still flinch when I see photos of us, still wonder what people think. But now I have tools, I have truth, and most importantly, I have me. Marriage didn't save me, but it gave me a mirror. And this time, I'm learning to look without turning away. The flat was cloaked in a delicate hush, the kind that settles after laughter has faded, but before the ache of silence turns cold. James and I sat across from each other, not angry, not even distant, just raw. The kind of quiet that asks to be filled with truth. A single lamp bathed the living room in amber light. My feet were tucked beneath me, fingers absently trailing the rim of a mug that had gone cold. James sat on the edge of the couch cushion, elbows resting on his knees like he was preparing for something heavier than conversation. We had not fought. Not really. But over the past few days, our words had been rationed, texts exchanged instead of calls. I'm fine standing in place of full sentences. Intimacy had taken a step back, not by force, but by fatigue. "I miss us," he said finally, voice barely above a whisper. I looked up slowly. We're right here. Are we? He asked. Because it feels like you've been somewhere I can't follow. My throat tightened. I hated how easily he could read me, how gently he pointed out the emotional walls I thought I'd disguised. I've been in my head, I admitted, and it's not always safe in there. James got up and walked toward me, not with urgency, but with that familiar steadiness. He knelt down beside me, placed a hand over me. Let's get out of your head. Just for tonight. I laughed, a brittle sound. And go where? Into honesty. Total honesty. No pretense. No brave face. I stared at him, blinking away the sting in my eyes. You really want to hear all that? He nodded. Especially that. So we began, slowly, then with more depth. He started with a confession that sometimes he felt overwhelmed by the weight of being in my safe space, not because he didn't want to be, but because he feared failing me. I told him about a dream I had recently, of him leaving. No reason, no drama, just walking out and not coming back. I had woken up shaking and hadn't told him, until now. We moved to the floor, legs crossed like teenagers, hearts bare like old friends rediscovering why we first said yes to forever. He shared his frustration, that people often praised him for being with me, as though love was an act of charity, not choice. He admitted how hard it was to smile through that without lashing out. I talked about a woman at work who had complimented James's shirt and then looked at me with that familiar pity. That single moment had stayed with me for days, not because I believed it, but because some small buried part of me still hadn't learned how not to. We opened up about fears we had only ever whispered in the quiet of their thoughts. My fear of being too much and not enough all at once. His fear of becoming a man who loved too gently and got tired of trying to prove it. I confessed that sometimes I wanted to hide, not because I was ashamed, but because being fully seen felt like too much exposure. He admitted that sometimes he needed me to believe him more loudly, because love isn't always patient, and even saints get weary. By the time the clock struck midnight, we had pulled back layers neither of us realized still existed. We weren't healing each other, just holding each other while we both healed. We wrapped ourselves in silence again, but this time it was the comforting kind. The kind that follows shared truths. The kind that says, you don't have to carry this alone anymore. At one point, James said, loving you is the easiest hard thing I've ever done. I smiled finally. A real one. I think I'm learning to believe that. He kissed my forehead. You don't have to learn alone. That night we fell asleep on the rug, bodies curled together, hearts quieter. Not because all was solved, but because nothing was hidden. And in a world that often asks us to perform, to hide, to shrink, we had chosen instead to be fully seen. Together.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. We release new captivating stories every week, and there are plenty more waiting for you right here on the channel.